we will chant requesting a Dharma talk together. But the pronunciation and the tune is a little bit different from the tone that we chanting this afternoon. So please allow me to use the microphone to lead. Okay, everyone ready? Brahma loka Tibati Sampati God An Shalian Tiwaran Ayajata Santi Tasanta Varasha Kashatika Te se tu dhammam anugam imam pasham.
Dalo, are you okay? Would you like some of this yellow oil? It's very good. Okay. Oh, both. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang gunuttarang upacchayang nammasami. So water images, stream images, river images, sea images abound in the Buddha's teachings. And we can characterize the life of most people, perhaps, even though outwardly quite systematic and with a clearly defined career trajectory, as in spiritual terms being, it's like flowing along in a stream. And it's hard to be aware of the stream when you're flowing along with the stream. So there are many images in the Buddha's teachings of going against the stream. So you go against the stream of habit, the stream of prejudice, the stream of defilements. And so in that decision to turn against the stream, it's inevitable that there will be some stress involved. Couldn't be any other way. But immediately we turn to face the stream, we become aware of the strength of the stream and the nature of the stream. This is analogous to a practice of meditation. So the mind is accustomed to rushing about here and there, jumping from one thing to another. And to my mind it's rather similar to the cartoons I used to watch when I was a child, in which there are certain laws of nature, like absolutely specific to cartoons. And one of the laws is that if you run over the edge of a cliff, as long as you keep running and you don't look down, you won't fall. Yeah? And the moment you look down, then you fall. So that's kind of like a given in cartoons, isn't it? But in so-called real life, human life, then I think we follow a similar kind of principle. As long as we can just keep going and jumping from this to that and being busy, carrying on, then we won't fall. So there's a fear of being alone, there's a fear of stopping, a fear of facing up to what's really going on, that you're running in midair. So there's a little courage needed to take on this practice of meditation, because we're stopping, we're looking down, we're going against the stream and willing to put up with the difficulties and the stress that it involves. So what we observe is that the mind, which is used to stimulation, used to activity, used to jumping around from place to place, point to point, from morning to night, is now being asked to stay with one thing, sustain attention on one particular object, and various reactions take place to that. And there is a pattern in these reactions, or there are some very predictable reactions of the mind. And the Buddha grouped these together, and there's a group of 5 hindrances to meditation. In fact, he didn't call them hindrances to meditation, he called them hindrances to peace and hindrances to wisdom. And interestingly enough, in this particular context, he expands upon. Meaning of wisdom here is knowing what is truly of benefit to you in your life, what truly leads to your well-being, and what does not lead to your well-being. The Buddha is saying, as long as any of these hindrances are present in your mind, you can never really determine what is of true benefit to your life and what is not. So these things are obstacles both to the peace of the mind and to the arising of wisdom. And in more technical terms, we can say they are obstacles to both samatha and vipassana. So without going at this point into much discussion of those two terms and the various opinions and views about them and what they mean, I just want to make a simple observation here that the dealing effectively with the hindrances is absolutely essential, whatever path of practice that you pursue. If you are following path of samatha or following path of vipassana, or you consider that they are two sides of the same coin, whatever your understanding of samatha and vipassana, the initial stages of practice must involve an understanding, developing, cultivating an understanding of how to be free of the hindrances. So the meditation object is designed to expose the hindrances. And the principle here is you can't bypass hindrances. There's not this kind of special magic bullet. There's not this technique, this secret esoteric technique. You just find this out and you know how to do this, and you can just bypass all of the usual problems that arise in meditation. That the hindrances are transcended through knowing and understanding them, seeing them clearly, developing the skills to deal with them. So in meditation, if we're becoming aware of hindrances, facing up to hindrances, learning about hindrances, this is very much in line with correct practice. It doesn't mean that because hindrances are arising in the mind, therefore we're not cut out for meditation, or it's too tough for us, we don't have what it takes, we don't have the barami and the accumulated virtues, or it's not that we just got the wrong technique, and if we keep looking around, sooner or later we will find this our technique, our particular customized vehicle, which will take us on the shortcut to liberation. So I'm advocating here examining your the way you feel about the difficulties that arise in meditation. Do you find it like a burden, or do you feel that you're hopeless and you feel discouraged because you have these obstacles? And if so, then you're adding unnecessarily to the difficulties that you face. It's a second layer of difficulty, or it's putting poison on the tip of the arrow. So these hindrances don't suddenly arise, appear in our minds because we're meditating. They're already there. they're already exerting an influence on our lives. But it's much more difficult to see them in daily life, particularly without any meditation practice. Often we can take them to be who we are, part of our personality, might even take pride in them and consider them cool. Or this kind of part of our unique identity as human being. So one of these, there are these little phrases you come across in the teachings, and you maybe hear them, and they're kind of ordinary phrases, and can overlook their significance. And one of those phrases is seeing hindrances as hindrances. So that sounds kind of obvious, doesn't it? You see a hindrance as a hindrance. But the point is that we usually don't see a hindrance as a hindrance. We see it as I say, as some element of who we are, of our personality, of something which is given about us, something we just have to put up with. But the Buddha, in one of his famous teachings about defilements, called them adventitious. So this is, don't worry if you don't know this word, if you're speaking second language, because most people who speak English as a first language don't know it or don't use it. It means come from outside. It's not inherent in the mind. So it's not that we have like original sin or original defilements that are sort of just part of our essential nature as a human being. But these are things that arise through causes and conditions, and thus can cease completely through causes and conditions. And it's very difficult to translate the word defilement here. So hindrances are like a subset of defilement. Defilement is the larger term. Hindrances are a particular group of defilements of the mind. So the word defilement, it has some, I think, unfortunate connotations. But the idea is of something being sullied, something which is clean becoming dirty. And just as Buddha Rupa can become covered in dust and dirt, and then we can wipe away that dirt and dust, doesn't become part of the Buddha Rupa. So defilements are things that are not an inherent fixed part of who we are. They are things that arise in the mind when we don't know how to look after the mind. And their effect on the mind, the reason that they're called kilesa or defilement, is that they sully the natural brightness of the mind. And so they are, another translation often used is affliction. They afflict the mind. But the etymology of kilesa is more of like a dulling or a sullying of the clarity and brightness and purity of the mind. So seeing defilements as defilement and seeing hindrance as hindrance. How do we do that? Well, we can do that by giving the mind a job to do. And so the job we give it is to sustain awareness on a single object through time. And when we try to do that, then hindrances appear in the mind. But if we are mindful enough, we can see them arise and pass away. So like whole chunks of your identity, things that you'd formerly thought were part of you, your personality, are now seen in a completely new light, simply because your focus is on a meditation object. Now something is seen as comes, it arises in the mind, stays there. If you feed it, it'll stay a long time. You don't feed it, it won't stay a long time. And then it passes away. So you're beginning to see mental states, mental factors from a whole new perspective of things that come into the mind and then leave the mind. And we observe that when they come into the mind, they have a detrimental effect. They make the mind cloudy and dull, and create suffering in the mind. So the hindrances are exposed, are revealed. We can develop an understanding of hindrances, how they take hold of our mind, what their attraction is, what their drawbacks are. So with all the defilements, particularly ones that come into our mind regularly, old friends or old enemies, if you like, you can be sure that there is a conflict, that one part of your mind may wish to be free of that defilement or hindrance, but another part of your mind actually wants to keep it. So the conflict, to put it plainly, is that we would like the mind to be at peace without having to renounce all the non-peaceful mental states in the mind. So we want our cake and eat it. So in the practice then, we're going against the stream. This was the first image. Going against habits, mental habits, which we're so familiar with that we don't even see them as problematic, or else we just consider this is who we are. So just a memory, it's just an anecdote that in the mid-70s, so I was traveling overland from England to India, and in those days, most people would have a book or two books in their backpack, and then you'd meet some other Western traveller and see whether you could exchange your book. You got something new to read. And there was a book that I'd heard about that I really wanted to read, and was constantly hoping that I'd meet somebody with this book who would exchange with me, and travelled all over India, and every now and again someone would refer to this book and say what a great book it was, and I never was able to come across it. Finally I got to Calcutta, and I went to the National Library in Calcutta, and I asked there, do you have this book? It was called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, and they did. So I ended up spend a whole day in this huge kind of colonial building in Calcutta, reading this book finally. And it was marvelous book. But why I mention it now is because one of the phrases, one of the teachings which has stayed with me all these years, is when the author says that the ego, as I remember, it might not be an exact translation, the ego is based upon the familiar. And what I understand is the things that we identify as being ourselves, who we are those things that we're most familiar with. There's things that arise and pass away in our minds so many times that we feel this is basically like our home base. This is which we come back to this these mental states, this like pattern or constellation of mental states. They're so familiar that we take it for granted that they're who we are. So it's through this effort to focus on a particular object that the falseness of that assumption is revealed. You begin to see all mental states as phenomena that are arising, passing away. But we get caught up in them, and it can be a struggle. So the first of the hindrances that becomes very prominent is that of sensual desire. Now these hindrances tend to have many manifestations, very coarse, all the way to very subtle manifestations. So the coarsest kind of expression of this first hindrance would be like sort of pornographic fantasies rising in the mind during meditation, because the most powerful sensual experiences are bound up with sexual experience. But the desire for, the will towards, the delight in sensuality is not restricted to those very coarse, powerful feelings. But here sensuality can be summarized basically as everything you like. Anything, everything that you like. So there are certain things that when your mind turns towards them, there's just this immediate sense of pleasure. And particularly it's something that you thought about a lot in the past, then there are certain kinds of trains of thought and topics that are just like a cozy armchair at home. You know, just my cozy armchair, and you're just going to settle back, and or like a comfort food, or something that's just make you forget everything just for a while and just enjoy. So this sensual desire does not, as I say, have to be a matter of sexual fantasies and sexual feelings, but it could be anything at all that we like. It could be thoughts of foods that we like, and pleasant experiences in the past, or it could be thoughts of music and the arts. And so, you know, if you're having like just enjoying thoughts and memories of like a head-banging heavy rock, and or someone else is having thoughts of opera, it's the same thing. It's not sort of any better if the music is more refined. It's the state of enjoyment and attachment in this distraction. So it's entertainment, basically. The mind wants to be entertained. So it could be thoughts of politics, thoughts of sport, thoughts of work, hobbies. So sometimes the mind can get tricky and think, well, it's actually quite useful thing. Some people say, I have all these really good thoughts when I'm meditating, really useful for my work. Is it all right if I pursue them and come up with some really good ideas for? No, that's not what they should be doing in the meditation. And and the mind lies to itself. It's like, when people take drugs and then they feel so incredibly creative, and then they emerge from the drug state and they look at what they've done and it's not anywhere near as good as it felt when they were under the influence of the drug. So it's like that when you're meditating. You think, wow, that's just such a brilliant thought, I need to write that down, or such a brilliant plan. It's not really so brilliant. It just seems that way. That's what a hindrance does to your mind. So the thing about the sensual world, whatever its manifestation, coarse or subtle, the underlying kind of conceit is that, put most simply, something is better than nothing. So you see when people are addicted to unhealthy lifestyle choices, and or you see doctors smoking, for instance. You say, well, because you think you're a doctor, you think you would know better. So it's not like an IQ problem, addiction to sensual pleasures. But what it is this need for a something. And if you speak to someone who's leading this sort of very unskillful life, and say, don't you see the dangers of this? Don't you see what's happening? And can you see that this kind of happiness, pleasure that you're experiencing is destructive, long term? It's really bad news. And quite often people can see that. They're not so foolish, they're blind to it. But the underlying idea is this can be this is a lousy kind of pleasure and happiness. It's long term, it's not for my welfare, but it's better than nothing. So this is how we justify so many foolish activities in our life. Yeah, it's not so good, is it? No, I know, but it's better than nothing. So this is what we can discover when we look at sensual desire arising in meditation, and just seeing the structure of it, how it works, the underlying view that some kind of entertainment, some kind of mental state, some kind of distraction, although it's not really giving any true satisfaction, is still better than nothing. So when a hindrance arises in the mind, then the first strategy is very simple. It's merely to recognize the hindrance as a hindrance. To recognize, oh, this is sensual desire. This is the craving for entertainment and for a something in the mind. So when there is a hindrance, you are aware of the presence of a hindrance. And quite often simply that much is enough. Simply the recognition of the hindrance as a hindrance, the mind puts it down, comes back to the object. But if the mind is going to this same hindrance again and again, a sort of chronic kind of pattern in the mind, then you have to consider applying specific antidotes. And a specific antidote for this obsession and love and enjoyment of sensual ideas and sensual thoughts and somethings in the mind is the investigation of the 32 parts of the body. Or you can just start with the first 5: hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth and skin. So this brings you down to earth, just reminds you of these very basic physical truths, and particularly with the sexual component, then it's reminding that these very strong sexual feelings are based upon a very partial and prejudiced view of human life, human body in particular. It's based upon censoring all kinds of information that opposes or undermines that strong emotion. So it's not, again, sort of condemning yourself for having these kinds of thoughts, kind of normal and natural in an untrained mind. But that opening the mind, allowing the mind to recognize the non-beautiful aspects of the human body can just bring it down to earth with a bump. And after that, we can re-establish the mindfulness. So the reflections and the ability to turn the mind to the unattractive, unbeautiful parts of the human body is a very good skill to develop, which can be applied at appropriate times just to bring the mind back to balance or bring it back to sanity when it's kind of lost the plot. So the second hindrance is basically allowing the mind to dwell on all the things that you don't like. So the first is allowing the mind to dwell upon things you like, and the warmth and the comfort and the enjoyment and the distraction that comes from that. Second hindrance is that of dwelling on things that you don't like. And this can be, and in a retreat situation where you're cutting off and you're retreating from, temporarily at least, so much of the stressful impact of daily life, then it's so much easier to see this hindrance, as a defilement. So in daily life there's so much sort of good reasons for being irritated and upset with people, and the way they drive and the way they behave and the way they speak and the way they treat you, and there can always seem to be a certain excuse for ill will. But in a retreat situation, then you suddenly find yourself getting really irritated with the way that someone sitting next to you sits down, or the way they stand up, or the way they walk, or the way they eat, or this is too, it should be like this, why is it like this, and why is it like that? And it's much easier just to see that there's this kind of floating ill will is arising, and you're just looking for a place to put it, or somebody to be your rubbish basket, someone to put this on, and the things that you get irritated with and upset with in a meditation retreat, or a retreat center, are so ridiculous and so irrational when you look at it, that it's that much easier to see it as a hindrance rather than as a natural reaction to the way society is these days, or the way people are around you. And one of the most toxic kinds of ill will is the ill will that you feel towards yourself, and particularly if you set yourself high goals in life. Generally you can achieve a lot with just sort of gritting your teeth and getting down to it and being very diligent and being a good boy or a good girl, but you can't do that in meditation. You can't accelerate this process just by gritting your teeth, and in fact it makes it even harder. So when you're trying to force your mind to give up distractions and wayward thoughts, and the mind rebels, becomes even worse, and then you can very easily slip into this self-aversion and turn that anger upon yourself. So this is a hindrance of mind to be recognized. It's a habit of mind. And so many people are all too willing to blame themselves, or to look at themselves in a negative light. It's basically a mild form of mental illness, which is so common in the Western world that it passes for normality, but it's not normal, at least for one who's following path of mindfulness and awareness. Oh, we're not going to be able to get through these 5 hindrances tonight. I think we have to maybe stop at these first 2, because the third one is sloth and torpor, sleepiness. Quite a lot to say about that. But what I would like to expand upon on the second hindrance is how it relates to the whole topic of painful feelings. So in meditation we're also exploring feeling, exploring pain, pleasure, trying to understand these things. And meditation is just a wonderful platform, a wonderful context in which to investigate the nature of painful feeling. So, say we're not this ascetics and no pain, no gain kind of idea, but physical pain is a part of human life. And if it's not, or hasn't, if you've been fortunate enough to be free of any kind of crippling physical pain in the past, it's probably going to appear sometime in your future. And it's a challenge for everyone. And so making this part of our study and exploration of what it means to be a human being is, I think, essential. So why I'm saying that, why I said that meditation practice is an ideal context is because we sit because we decide to sit, and pain arises, and if we've had enough, we can just get up. No one's going to tell you off if you do that. Or if you don't get up, you can change, you can move the posture. There's no, here at least, there's no, nobody's forbidden from changing posture. So you have a certain amount of control. You can look at physical pain if you wish to, and if you've had enough, then you can stop. So this is why I think it's obviously preferable to when you're experiencing physical pain through an injury or through an illness, when you don't have that option of only looking at it when you want to. So the hypothesis to be tested here is that what we call physical pain is in fact a mixture of physical pain and the resistance to physical pain, the aversion to physical pain. And that if we can learn to recognize the aversion and the ill will and the fear and anxiety which tends to appear so quickly and so naturally when we experience physical pain, if we can separate those two things, then often we can find that the physical pain itself is not so bad. It's workable. So one teacher has come up with a mathematical formula for this, and is that suffering equals pain multiplied by resistance to pain. So here, this very important distinction between pain and suffering. So let's say, according to this formula, if you have a small amount of pain, but you have a lot of resistance to it, when they're multiplied, you have a lot of suffering. But you could also have a lot of pain and only a small resistance to it multiplied, then not so much suffering. But you could also have a lot of pain, but if you had zero resistance to the pain, then any number multiplied by zero, as you know, is zero. So this is the possibility that we're looking into, that you can experience physical pain without mental suffering. So mindfulness is the chief tool, but again, when we take this hypothesis that this experience we call pain, like knee pain, back pain, or whatever, is a mixture of a physical sensation and the resistance to it, the reaction to it. So how can we separate those two things? Well, the first strategy is to consciously create in the mind an attitude of acceptance or even love or metta, because the mind cannot have a wholesome and an unwholesome, or a positive and a negative attitude at the same time. So this is very simple replacement strategy, replacing the ill will with goodwill. So one way of doing that is to imagine that the breath is passing through the area of pain, so you just, obviously it's still coming in through your nostrils, now through your nostrils, but you're using your power of imagination. And just to imagine the breath as this cool breeze, this loving, caring sensation passing through the area of pain. So this is one case where we can use the power of imagination, creativity, to create a particular emotion, a sense of acceptance, and a positive regard for the sensation. So we're caressing the sensation, we're comforting it as we would comfort a small child who's in pain and crying. And through this practice we can let go of the ill will and the resistance and be left with the pain. Another strategy, and this is more in the kind of the vipassana or the insight set of strategies, in which we replace resistance to an interest in the nature of the pain. So we make the sensation the object of meditation. And so we can put down the breathing for a while, and we say, well, we try to bring the mind back from the pain to the breath, can't do it anymore. The pain is too insistent. So now we look at the sensation and we investigate the sensation. And there are three headings, three particular ways of looking at a sensation, or modes of investigation. One is of the particular characteristic of the pain. So there are different kinds of pain. There's like pressure pain, shooting pain, burning pain. And we say, what exactly is the nature, the characteristics of this pain? So rather than reacting to I don't want this, go away, we're saying, what is this? What is it, the nature of it? And is it stable? And we see the instability and the impermanence of the characteristic of the pain. And then the location of the pain. Where exactly is the pain situated? Is it in one particular spot? Again, when we look more closely, we find that the location of the pain is fluctuating. It's not stable. It's impermanent. And thirdly, the intensity of the pain. So we can use this like chart of 1 to 10. How strong is the pain and how stable is that intensity of pain? What we find is usually that the pain comes in waves. It builds to a crescendo and then it passes away and then it reaffirms itself. So here we are replacing the ill will towards physical pain with the attitude of the scientist, the investigator. It's one who's taking an interest in the pain as a phenomena. And so what is the characteristic of the pain? Is it permanent or impermanent? What is the location of the pain? Is it permanent or impermanent? What is the intensity of the pain? Is it permanent or impermanent? And this interest in looking at the pain and understanding the pain removes the ill will until only the pain remains. So these are these are two skillful means of dealing with physical pain. So my advice with physical pain is that this kind of practice is you shouldn't do it too often. If you sit for a long time and you get physical pain, then and just be patient with it for a certain amount of time. Then sometimes you can just change your posture. But if investigation of physical pain is a tough practice, it's hard to do it, there are a lot of wonderful results that come from success in this practice, success meaning being able to separate the pain from the resistance to it, most importantly, I think, our fear of death is to a large extent fear of physical pain. And removing and having a handle on and knowing that you can manage physical pain, you have a way of being with it, you have a way of investigating it, reduces fear of physical pain and reduces fear of death. But if our meditation, every meditation involves physical pain and dealing with physical pain, then it's hard to sustain that kind of enthusiasm for practice and enjoyment of practice that you need. So it's one option, one kind of practice. Also, common sense is always a virtue, and we had a number of friends of mine who had great kind of patience and endurance and investigation of physical pain, and they ended up having to have operations on their knees. So, it's knowing moderation. So, that's the evening talk, and I shall continue with the other hindrances tomorrow.